I'm going to temporarily position my inserts, making sure that they're all going the direction that I want. And I'm only going to hold them in place temporarily because in order to pad stitch this using an embroidery machine, I'm going to have to remove the insert temporarily while I double check my cross mark, and then I'm going to have to position it again into the sewing machine. So I don't pin this a great deal. I want the pins to be easy to remove but secure. So sometimes I'll use a safety pin. When the pieces are positioned, it's time to start pad stitching. As far as the center square, I would not do any pad stitching because this embroidery is elaborate and it's also a little bit fragile, and any stitching across the star would kind of deteriorate it. If I did feel I had to pad stitch this piece, and you don't have to because it's so small, I would do echo quilting around the outside. This piece is going to have some decorative embroidery that'll be visible from the back, and the reason I'm doing that is my pad stitching is going to be embroidery and it's going to be very decorative. If I embroider the center piece as well as the exterior pieces, I can flip the table topper over and have a completely different looking table topper. Before I begin pad stitching these, I ask myself, do I want to embroider them? If no, I can use these lines to guide me and installing a couple rows of pad stitching, and that'll be absolutely adequate. All of the pad stitching has been done. I use clear plastic thread on the top, and I use a decorative thread on the bottom so that the back of the table topper looks nice too. The center square of the project was embroidered without the star insert in place. The center block is so small it does not require all 3 layers be held in place with stitching. And the embroidery I've selected for the back is so complicated that it might actually detract from the star if it was stitched over top of it, even if you use clear plastic thread. You should not use the edges of lined quilt backs to sew the pieces together because this often causes the pieces to pull out of shape. You always use these dots that we've drawn using the Easy Complete quilt template to guide you when joining. This video shows 2 great ways to use the dots to join the piece. One way is position the pieces so that the dots meet and pin them together. So that's one way. And once these are pinned to one another, making sure the top dots definitely match, then you go to the sewing machine and sew them. Now, when you do this, I like to pin right along the stitching line. And I like to actually sew from the center to the top dot and then back stitch. You want to secure your threads wherever it meets this dot. Then I actually flip the piece over and I sew again from the center, laying my stitches on the previous one to this top dot and back stitch. Now when I pin, I kind of flip the pieces over and make sure the pins land on the line drawn for the stitching line. When I baste these together, I just start on one side. I go through one dot on one of the pieces and out the bottom dot on the piece that I'm going to join to it. And then I go to the second dot from the bottom to the second dot on the bottom of the other one. And then I stitch around one time. I make sure that the basting stitches stay in place. I find that's easier. So I give it a nice tug and come out the second dot. And then I continue sewing from one dot through the corresponding dot on the other piece, skipping every other one after I've made that initial knot. When I get to the top, I weave my way back down, covering the spots that were missed on each side. So I'm going to go through this dot It's going to bring me to this blank space right here. I'm going to fill that. Try not to catch your insert. Going to come out here. Going to go again through the bottom dot, out the last bottom dot, and I've got everything held in place nice and secure. I can do some of this basting and leave it for a little while and it won't come loose. When I finish my basting, I've only basted between the points on the small square, and I'm going to stitch only between the top dots that are basted together. So what I usually do is I usually drive a pin along the stitching line and make sure the stitching lines match on the front and the back, and I usually sew halfway over to the dot, secure my threads either by back stitching or doing a lock stitch. So I've left a long thread tail here so you can see I sewed from approximately the center over. I didn't back stitch here, but I did back stitch here. I stopped at the top dot. Now I'll usually flip the piece over. I'll drive a pin through just like I did before. Make sure my stitch lines match. And then what I'm going to do is start stitching here with no back stitching. Stitch to where the top dot is and the very tip of the basting and back stitch. Try and make sure you don't catch any of your insert while you're doing this. So you can see my stitch line is now complete. What I'm going to do is remove the basting stitches and add some more pieces, only to the square. I'm not going to worry about the legs of the rectangle just yet.